Hi, welcome to Economy and Markets TV, where we have conversations with a purpose. I'm your host, Dave Okenquist, Senior Research Analyst here at Dent Research. Today, we're going to take you around the world of economic news, and we do this every single Friday, which means I bring on Mr. Rodney Johnson, the editor of Boom and Bust. Rodney, good morning.
Morning, Dave.
Good to have you on. As always, we try to keep things moving here to a topic to about 2 minutes or less. I got a bell here to keep us both in line. So with that, let's dive right in. The big news for economically was the Fed. They raised rates 0.25% to about between 2 to 2.25%. Interesting that they expect rates to rise to over 3 now. One notable thing I noticed that the Fed, they upgraded their 2018 GDP growth from 3.1 from 2.8. I like to keep you guys updated on the GDP now from the Atlanta Fed. For the third quarter, that's now at 4.4%. Something that you wrote, Rodney, that you noticed, and I'd like a little bit of explanation for, is that the Fed removed the term accommodative from its policy statement. What does that mean? Well, first, what did it mean when it was in, and now what does it mean now that it's out?
When they hold interest rates below inflation, it's seen as accommodative because people can borrow money cheaper than the rate of inflation. So cheaper than the rate that it's kind of devaluing over time. And so inflation, the Fed's preferred measure is personal consumption expenditures. And so that's running at 2% now, the core measure. And so they have just raised rates to 2 to 2.25, which is right at just over the rate of inflation. So it's no longer accommodative. You have to pay a little bit more than inflation to borrow that money overnight. But more importantly on the Fed, what they did in their statement, they came out and they had this dot plot chart, right, that shows where the members expect rates to be over time. And so it wasn't changed. It remained the same. And that's what people were wondering. Were they going to move it up a little bit? Were they expecting rates to go up a little bit faster based on current strength in the U.S. economy? And the answer was no. And so that's why people breathed a bit of a sigh of relief. And you saw interest rates actually move down just a few basis points, which seems counterintuitive because everybody was going, great, they're not going to do anything faster, we're okay.
So, Rodney, you've mentioned this thing, at least for a good year now, this idea of they're going to raise rates to give them room to lower them. Is this part of what's going on, or do they genuinely believe that this is where rates should be?
Well, it's one and the same, right? Where should rates be? Their measure, it's R-star, not worth getting into, but it's around 3%. And so by their measure, they should have rates around 3, if not just a touch higher. And their expectation is 3 3/8 by the end of next year, so that when the economy rolls over, not if, but when, they will have room to move it back down. The question is, will it make any difference? You got to remember, back before the downturn in 2008, short-term rates were at 5%. They weren't at 3 or 2.5, they were at 5. And so clearly there was enough room to move down. And so if you're starting at 2.5 or 3 when the next downturn comes, what does it matter? And my view is not much.
Excellent. Just right on time there. Thank you, Rodney. Yeah, we're just one last thing. We are still not normal yet, right? After all these years.
Still not normal.
Good perspective. All right, let's move to housing. The Case-Shiller Housing Price Index came in for last month. It's nearly 6% growth for the year, which is actually lower than expectations. It's kind of interesting there. Something that we touched on, I think, last month is the strong price gains in the West. Seattle's over 12%. Las Vegas, nearly 14% for the year. That's just on fire. Other places, not so much. New York, Chicago. We had other news. New home sales were up 3.5% in August and nearly 13% for the year. We're right on the 6.1 months of inventory, which is, I checked right, the historical average. So what do you get out of these reports, Rodney? See things slowing down, showing some strength. What's going on? Or is it more of the same?
Well, the price growth rate has declined from 6.5 to 5.9. Is that important? Yeah. But still, it's 6%. My goodness. I mean, this is pretty good, right? You sat on your house, you paid your mortgage, you got a 6% growth rate. Home sales new home sales are not expanding quickly. And there again, that is builders managing inventory so they don't get stuck like they were in 2008, 2009, 10, and 11, by the way, went all the way to spring of 2012. And so I think what you're seeing is a kind of a match of supply and demand. The price is the thing. We still don't have wage growth that's strong enough for people to keep stepping up. You're seeing some of the higher price markets become exhausted, like New York, and just kind of roll over some. And I believe new home sales, you also had prices come down just a touch to get those units out the door. Prices are still above last year, but not by much. And so what I think we're seeing is a bit of tiredness in the housing market because prices are high. high without wages following. And as we've said for, 2 years now, one of these things have to break or they have to meet somewhere in the middle. I think we're going to get some wages coming in a little bit. I think you're going to see people step up a little bit in the housing market, but it's going to be at the modest end. It's not going to be at the high end.
Yeah, and something we talked about too is the entry level has almost disappeared. So maybe we can see that sector come back a little bit then? It
would be good if we did. It's going to be interesting, particularly with what we talked about a minute ago with the Fed. If rates do go up, mortgage rates do go up again, that eats into affordability. Now, I wasn't worried about it when we went from 3 5/8 mortgages to 4.5. We get to 5, 5 1/4, 6. That's when things become difficult for people because that monthly is moving up so quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all I had on that topic, but I wanted to squeeze something else in when we had time. There was some news from oil. The Brent is at $80. WTI is at about $70. The U.S. is, of course, increasing production. There's trouble in OPEC, of course, Venezuela, and always stuff going on in the Middle East. What do you make of this?
You know what? It's what you and I have talked about for some time. Oil prices were low. Obviously, that's why Saudi Arabia, OPEC, and their co-conspirators, Russia and the others, agreed to cut production a couple of years ago so that prices would come back. And so Americans continue to produce. We're now at 11 million barrels a day, which will be a record production year for the United States. And you are also looking at people wondering what's going to happen with Iran and Venezuela. That's the thing. You and I have talked about that all year, really, saying that as those two situations degraded, there would be less supply in the market, prices would go up, and that would put OPEC into a pinch because they don't want prices too high, and of course, we love it. And so they have production quotas. Americans are producing more. I'm pretty good with it all. Doesn't hurt my feelings at all that OPEC is feeling some pain.
And Rodney said it, and it happened. What do you look at that? All right, great. Let's move on. Let's move on to Europe. This one is almost sad in a sense, but it's just another basket case country here. Greece. The Greeks owe $214 billion in back taxes, as you know, is roughly equal to their gross domestic product. 3.7 million Greeks are behind on their taxes, and almost half of this penalty is just there's penalties and interest. This is something you've written about, and I think we've even touched on in this show, is the trouble that Greece has collecting taxes. This is crazy. I mean, how can you have any chance of running a government if no one's paying their taxes?
Right, and that's been the problem, right? It got so bad in Greece that there was a schedule that the tax collectors kept that depending on how much tax you owed, you would pay them a bribe according to this schedule, and they would essentially lower your taxes by some multiple of the bribe.
Right.
And when you've institutionalized bribes for tax evasion, you know you've reached a certain threshold or a certain floor. I don't know what this is. But their problem, of course, is that they keep raising taxes as the lenders to them for their bailouts have required, and people said it, I'm not going to pay because, one, I can't. It's become such a burden. And by the way, we're all good at evading anyway.
Right.
And so they're not fixed. They're not in a good place. Everybody was saying, hey, great, the bailouts worked. They got out from under this a couple of weeks ago, I guess actually a month ago now. And as we said at the time, it's not over. Greece will be back. And they might eventually leave the euro.
So they are paying tax. They're just not paying it to the government. They're paying it to the corrupt official, right? Or whatever.
Well, and a lot of them don't pay taxes. The estimate is that over 20% of their economy happens on the black market. 20%. For comparison, in the U.S., it's about 5%. And if we had as much money not being paid in taxes, it would be roughly $20 trillion in unpaid taxes. Wow. And so it's a huge burden.
Now, is this part of the move that we've been hearing about, I think in Europe more so than the United States, but moving to a cashless system, which would be able to catch this sort of thing?
It certainly is. They, of course, took the 500 euro note out of circulation. There are different institutional changes going on in Europe, particularly in Italy, where if you're not offered a receipt, it's a crime. And so the idea is to get everything on the tape, meaning the register tape. But again, it takes two. And so if both parties benefit from not doing it that way, what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially if the citizens do not have any confidence in their government, then it just makes them less even wanting to be able to pay their taxes. So
exactly.
Craziness there. One last thing. The news came out late yesterday afternoon. The SEC is suing Elon Musk for his funding secured tweet. Come on, man. You just never should have sent that thing when it's too late. So what's going to happen here, Rodney? What does it mean for Elon Musk and then, more importantly, Tesla, I would say?
Well, it was a couple of wrong steps, right? He shouldn't have sent the tweet. Okay, that makes sense. You are running a public company. You have the ability to pull the levers. And so you said something that was demonstrably untrue, that you had the funding secured. And so when the SEC called him on it, which apparently they did, they said, look, here's what you can do. You can pay this settlement, write a check of some amount without admitting or denying guilt. And we kind of move on down the road. And he said, yes, this was in place. Right up until yesterday when he said, I woke up feeling like I needed to defend my integrity and the truth and blah, 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 blah. Not to belittle that. I certainly understand that. But what it means is he's now put himself and the company in jeopardy, because when he decided to fight it, now the SEC comes at him full bore. And if they prove wrongdoing, that opens him and the company to civil liability from investors of all stripes who can turn around and say, wait a second, you caused us to lose money. Either we bought it when you said it, and so we were buying at 390 or 380, whatever, and it rolled back to 270, or we just held a long time and all of this has ruined the value of our company. And so either way, he's opened himself and the company up to billions of dollars in legal liability, ensnared the company in all of this at the exact time the company needs cash. And so it couldn't come at a worse time. Very poor management decision on his part. Whether he believes himself to be right or not, he did not do right by the company and by the shareholders.
Last question on Elon Musk. Does this mean we're not going to Mars?
Well, I don't know. I don't doubt visionaries. They clearly have the vision, right?
Yeah.
Maybe we go to Mars, but maybe we go on Jeff Bezos' rocket instead.
Okay. Amazon Smile logo. That's just fine.
Exactly.
All right. Thanks, Rodney. That's all we had for this week. Looking ahead to next week, I got factory orders, car sales, and the big one will be next Friday, the jobs report. Do you have your eyes on anything else, Rodney?
Well, it is political, right? We didn't talk about the Kavanaugh thing. It is being voted on in the committee right now. And so we'll get the Senate, if it comes out of committee, we'll get the Senate vote next week. That's going to be a big deal.
Yep.
Certainly, it's going to pull a lot of eyes that direction. But really, this sets the stage, as everything else has for the last month, for the midterms. And we are in October now, getting into next week. This is all midterms, all the time, to determine what happens, basically from January going forward.
Thanks for that setup, Rodney. Thank you for joining me. Thank you all for watching. If you want to leave any questions, comments, send those to TV@economyandmarkets.com. Thank you.